Hopefully you've been enjoying your Law Institute experience. It's nice to look out. Yes, thank you. It's nice to look out in the crowd and see so many friends and colleagues. For those I've been able to say hello to, for those who I have not, my apologies. As this Law Institute continues to grow and we get more and more people, there are more and more people we need to speak with and talk to, and it makes it very difficult. But it's nice to see you all here, and I thank you for being here. The initial topic for this conversation was really a focus on intellectual property, technology, and the title you may find a little bit misleading, in part because of how late I not only decided on, but completed my presentation. Those that know me may find that shocking, but it's true nonetheless. So some of the typical topics and things we've talked about at Law Institutes over the past few years, we talked about software license agreements, reseller, indemnification. Data use is a big one now, particularly with AI, cybersecurity, and the like. And of course, AI is always that lingering topic, but I thought, you know, AI gets really complicated. I'm not going to talk. Can we get the slides up here? I'm not going to talk too much about AI. But in the process of doing some research, suddenly my car wouldn't start, my coffee was tasting funny, Alexa was sending me dirty messages, and so I figured I better talk about AI a little bit. But AI is sort of one of these things that we talk about and we seem to know a lot about, but we're not always talking about the same thing when we talk about AI. So to get to some of the real IT issues and intellectual property issues, there's a bit of a long road we have to go down to get there to make sure we're all on the same page. And through the process of putting this together, I learned a lot about AI that I didn't know already, and I'm hoping you'll find the same. Some disclaimers. For what it's worth, these disclaimers were drafted by AI, and I did use AI to assist me in my presentation. So much like when you ever have the experience where you're like talking with somebody about maybe a new car, and suddenly you get all these car ads on your phone, right? Because somebody somewhere is listening. Maybe you'll start to get some ads about procurement and what have you after this week. So where are we in the context of AI? I know that we have a lot of states that are working on AI governance right now, trying to figure out not only how to use AI in procurement, but what staff is allowed to use and what this looks like. States are trying to define AI and identify what tools. Are those tools restricted to particular named items? Open versus closed AI. These are probably all terms that we've heard. But the last bullet is really the key bullet, and that is regardless of what your policy is in your office, your folks are using AI. We know this, right? We understand this. And everyone understands this, I think, across government. This is one of these things. Universities, you kind of expect to say you can't use AI. But they know every student is using AI, so they try to put guidelines around what's acceptable and what's not. It's just an inevitability. So we've seen a number of things, and a lot of what we know about AI is based on what's in the news. And so these are, this case I think everyone's aware of, though there are several. By the way, what I tried to do on each one of these slides, each one of these topics, is I put a link to at least one of the articles that I used or one of the sources that I used so that you have an ability to go back if there's something that's of interest to you and to check the source and to learn a little bit more. So you'll see a link really just about every slide that's in here. This one pertains to government. We've all seen the appellate briefs and the attorneys that have been sanctioned for using AI. This is 3 attorneys representing Alabama's prison system. Were sanctioned and removed from a federal case for using ChatGPT, which included fake case law in one of their filings. Right? And we're starting to see this, not only removed from the case, but being sanctioned. I don't know if anyone has seen this one. This also pertained as well, a prominent law firm. And yes, the name is on here. It's been very public. They have 1,800 lawyers, but they submitted a bankruptcy filing riddled with fake citations. And of course, they said they were profoundly embarrassed. Deloitte government report. Has anyone heard about this one? $290,000 report for the government of Australia. generated somewhat by AI, full of hallucinations. So think about that when we hire a consultant, and to what extent is a consultant using AI? And I know some states now require that consultants disclose, or anyone providing anything to the state disclose the use of AI. But how effective is it really to require disclosure when they may not even know what their staff is doing in regard to AI? Here's another one. Amazon sued Perplexity. Perplexity AI isn't necessarily as well known, but this is one that I thought really starts to get into procurement a little bit. We'll talk about agentic, that's using AI agents, but they created automation to place orders for their users through the AI tool, connecting it through Amazon accounts. And Amazon said, we don't want you doing that. Now, I assume Amazon is going to be developing their own AI that allows shopping, and that's why. But think about it from a procurement standpoint. At what point might folks be able to use AI to generate purchase orders within state systems? And at what point is that authorized versus something that people are just going to be able to do that may not be authorized? Last one, how many of you deal with property issues sort of more generally than procurement? I know there are some in here. This was one that just came up to me, and this was actually in my home state of Minnesota, but it's come up in a lot of places where the big data centers that are used to run AI, they want to go in and they want to open data centers in areas. And so they sign these economic development agreements with local governments, and in some cases perhaps with state government or universities, and they make public officials sign non-disclosure agreements. So decisions are being made here out of the public view in order to support AI data centers. And again, just another thing that we're seeing in the news. So this shapes a lot of what we see. And of course, we all know that the general public is very educated in general and when it comes to AI issues. So it doesn't cause any fear or panic whatsoever. And in fact, even in this room, I'm guessing there are a lot of folks that were very resistant, were somewhat perhaps afraid of what AI may bring and what this means. So there was a Quinnipiac University poll that was sort of interesting, right? 12% of Americans feel they know a great deal about AI. That's a really small percentage. 17% know nothing, and everyone else is sort of generally in the middle. But again, where is their knowledge of AI coming from? Generally speaking, it's from the media, not necessarily from really understanding AI. There are generational differences. Is this shocking to anybody? Right? You can kind of follow the line as it goes down from a great deal to hardly any. There are socioeconomic differences in understanding of AI. Very interesting, people with means tend to think AI will improve their lives on a day-to-day basis. Those that are generally at the lower socioeconomic level think AI will do more harm than good. And it's almost even, right? It's just flipped. So where you sit and the resources available to you seems to have an impact on your views of AI. And again, we might say, okay, how is this relevant to procurement? But this is relevant to the citizens of our states and the things that we buy. All right, so I keep using the term AI. And I know a lot of folks probably have heard, well, it's not really AI. AI's been around for a long time. We want to talk about generative AI, right? Creating new things. But in the process of going through this, I found generative AI and a general definition from the GAO. And the other one that we often use commonly is agentic AI or AI agents, right? Those are the chatbots that answer things that have been really effective. I know a number of states are using these for things like password resets. Turns out we don't need human beings to reset passwords for state employees. We can put an AI agent in, and that can verify identity through whatever, and they can reset the password, and all is well. And it's one less HR issue we have to deal with down the road, right? That was supposed to be a joke. Or generative AI, the idea of creating all of these images and audio and video. Like, have you seen videos online and you don't know if they're real or if they're AI generated or what have you? And I think that's a lot of what's really scaring people, is the inability to differentiate between information that is real and information that is fake and generated by generative AI. But there's a whole bunch of other terms that are out here. And again, I'm not going to go into all of this, but everyone has heard AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning are different things. But ask somebody to explain what that means, right? And so I found this as an interesting sort of layer or level of what we're talking about and the specifics of it that I'm not going to get into. I don't have necessarily the expertise to go into all of this, but it's interesting to talk about generative AI as a subset of machine learning. And again, what it uses and how it identifies patterns. And so I put this in here. There are a couple of sort of deep links in here for you to go if you want to learn a little bit more. Very interesting article that sort of unpeels the onion of what we talk about and how we get to generative AI. But there are some other sort of categories and some other classifications of how we do this. So, and this is really coming from IBM, which, was somewhat of the earlier, what was their early, was it Big Blue or something? I'm forgetting now. It was one of the earlier sort of AI initiatives. I think it started learning to play chess, right? And that was sort of one of the first efforts. And so IBM has a lot of resources in this field. But they talk about artificial narrow intelligence or weak AI, and that's all that exists today. When we really talk about broad-scale AI, we're on the very beginning of that curve, right? The very beginning of that acceleration curve. It can be trained to perform single tasks, narrow tasks. It might have a little bit of a memory, but it doesn't have a long-term memory. But they also go on to talk about things like general AI and super AI. And I think this is what really goes on to start to scare people, right? Not so much what ChatGPT can do now, some of that, or some of the others, some of that's a little bit scary. But if we want to get into some of these, like general AI, which is just theoretical, to have AI be able to understand context and the needs of human beings, and to engage in actual intellectual tasks and logic and reasoning, we're not there yet. But how far away are we? Or super AI, which at this point in time is really just out of science fiction movies, or Isaac Asimov novels or what have you, right? The iRobot sort of a thing for those that have seen that movie, where the AI capabilities really evolve to a point of understanding human sentiment. Very scary stuff looking forward, but right now we're really just in that beginning place. We can also take a look at it, and this was another area, so narrow AI you see on the bottom, to strong AI, and then you see the types based on functionality. And right now we have the reactive, again we talked about chatbots, we have spam filters, right? Things that have a little bit of intelligence to them. Recommendation engines, you go right now into Spotify or into Netflix, and it gives you recommendations based on what you've chosen before. That's this reactive type of AI. When we get to things like ChatGPT, self-driving cars, how many of you are scared by self-driving cars? I was just in Arizona and they had these Waymos everywhere. You familiar with them? I would like to at some point see what that experience is like, but I just wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready to do it. Or the new thing that sounds really great is having a virtual assistant that will do everything for you. But that sounds a little scary too, because you have to give them like access to everything in order to do it. And that's one of the pieces that scares us as well. But this is limited memory AI. This is the type of AI that you can have a conversation with, you can chat with, and it sort of understands your frame of reference, but doesn't necessarily have that long-term memory or that ability to really change as much based on your inputs. And that's sort of where we are. And then this theory of mind and the self-aware sort of goes back to these concepts of general and super AI. So again, I have links to all of this for those of you that are really interested. But as much as we focus right now on some of the reactive or the limited, the narrow AI, the ChatGPT functions, and what have you, we have to keep an eye out really on what's coming next and how quickly this is advancing. The CIO I used to work for in the state of Minnesota used to like to say, technology is moving at the slowest pace it ever will. That is, every day technology is moving at a faster pace. And as we all know, procurement has done an excellent job of keeping pace with technology. Right? We're still purchasing technology using the same methodologies in large regard that we used to purchase widgets, right? Automobiles, road salt, whatever it may be. And I know there's been some update, but we've never been able to quite keep up with the advances in the pace of technology. And so that's going to be an increasing challenge as we move forward. All right. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit here. So getting a little bit of an understanding of AI and the direction AI is going into, you can imagine that government is first having to define what it means when it talks about AI. And it's interesting because when most government talks about AI, what are we talking about? We're talking about the early, narrow stage AI, the stuff that we see now, not necessarily even thinking about or being able to contemplate what might come because we don't know. And as we know with technology, we can define what the future state looks like. But will the future state be anything like what IBM is assuming the future state will be like? Remember, this is the company that at one point said a computer is a great thing and the world will maybe need 4 of them, right? And now we carry them around in our pockets. And by the way, yes, they're listening to everything we say. That was just because I don't know if everyone got to do a ghost tour, and so I thought I'd scare you a little bit. So how do governments define AI? A lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions. And again, who's doing the definitions of AI? It's our legislators. And I think we can all accept that our legislators are experts on things like AI and technology in general. Right? Unfortunately not, but there are a lot of outside parties pushing this forward. But listen, this creates the challenges for us across the board with technology. And so states have looked at different sources for guidance on AI rather than trying to recreate the wheel themselves. A number of states, and we'll come to this in just a moment, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's almost as long as a title as the National Association of State Procurement Officials, but they're commonly referred to as OECD, and they work on an international basis, and they have a definition that they put out that a number of states have looked at and sort of started to incorporate. And again, I'll come to that a little bit more. They define AI system, machine-based system. And again, I won't read all the definitions that are up here, but they go into AI system lifecycle, factors, knowledge, and then they start to identify some of the stakeholders. And again, there's a lot more if you go to this link and you look into the report that's there, but these are some of the basic definitions. So a starting point, not that it's the only one, but it is a starting point. Texas, now, if I'm wrong, just shout out that I'm wrong because things change so quickly. But I found that Texas had a House bill which was enacted that adopted the OECD definition verbatim. Anybody here from Texas? Am I right? Okay. That makes me feel better, thank you. Okay? Anyone here from New York before I go on? All right, in the back of the room, you can shout it out as well, right? There's an expanded definition here, and again, I give a little bit of a reference to it. And they had some interesting definition, right? Specifying that AI systems abstract such perceptions into models through analysis in an automated manner. It's a pretty broad definition, right? It's a pretty forward-facing definition. So they've used, I believe, some of the OECD baseline and added in some additional language from there. California, I know we have folks here from California, and Title 15.2, Artificial Intelligence, Training, Data, and Transparency. And there's a definition in there of artificial intelligence, engineered or machine-based system, again, using some of that OECD language that's there. And I know California has done a lot, so folks that are here, if you want to shout out and share anything as we go on, please do so. And please, all of you, feel free to do so. We also have US code and a definition of artificial intelligence here and machine learning. Again, what you're seeing is some commonalities here, a machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, so requiring human input, which may not always be the case, right, as we look forward-facing, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. And so we can go in here and we have US code. I have not seen a lot of states follow the US code model, but Again, a lot of similarities in the language that's here. We have the European Union's definition in Article 3. Again, what do we see? AI system means a machine-based system designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy. Does this language start to look familiar? Kind of along the lines of what we have across the states for our procurement code, right? A lot of the same terms, a lot of the same language, but we all like to say it slightly differently so that we can remain unique. At some point, I do wonder, much as we try to do, for example, with the model procurement code that you heard about yesterday, at some point, will there be an effort to really try to align on a more national or global level some of the definitions of AI? This is clearly something that is not really just tied to one specific state, location, right, or geography. So those are some of the definitions. Now, when we talk about AI, and we talk about how it impacts us, even as government officials, you're not just concerned about what's impacting you from the what can you use, but also what's the private sector regulation around this, right? That's going to come back and that's going to influence and that's going to impact what we see from supplier communities. It's going to impact how our employees use this information. And so what's some of the private sector regulation? So 200 plus bills as of October of 2025. 20 have made it to signature. And this is, again, focused on not public sector use, but private sector regulation. What can you use chatbots for? What can you use different AI agents and so on for? And what's interesting here is a lot of the legislation has focused in on chatbots, and particularly those that serve as companion bots or mental health chatbots. And how is that interacting? I just saw, it's not in here because I just saw this today, there was a $1 million campaign in the New York subway system for a website, I believe, that's called friends.com or something like that. Now, this is not a sales pitch by any means. And what it's saying is you can basically find a friend online and someone to talk to if you're lonely using this chatbot. What do you think has been the result of that campaign? Do you think it's been positively accepted by New Yorkers? No, the reason it was in the news is because, again, they spent $1 million across the subway, lots and lots of media exposure, and almost all the signs have been graffitied with different things, right? Now, I'm not judging anybody who wants to use a chatbot and interact and what have you. It probably has its place. But people have a lot of concerns about these, and a lot of the graffiti was about privacy and surveillance, and some of it was just very judgy, by the way. But this is an area where I think you've probably seen in the news as well, you have a lawsuit now, and I don't have all of the details here, but something about, it was a teenager who was chatting with, early on, with one of the chatbots who suggested suicide as a solution to one of his problems. Right? And these are the kinds of things that we see with AI as it continues to grow, particularly with the chatbots and the generative AI, is it doesn't necessarily know when to stop. It doesn't have that emotional filter. Rather, it has the filter that's given to it by those that program and design it. And so there's been a lot, again, of legislative attention to the AI tools that interact with people on a human level. And on the bottom there, Illinois, the law bars licensed therapists from using AI for anything beyond supplementary support. So you can use it to help perhaps with note-taking, but you can't use it in any other fashion. In the European Union as well, they're banning AI applications that relate to what they refer to as cognitive behavioral manipulation, so things like therapy, voice-activated toys that encourage dangerous behavior, biometric identification, which is another interesting use of AI. How many of you, when you went to the airport this time, they did a photo of you when they asked for your ID, and they say they don't maintain that photo? It matches up somehow. Do you think there's an AI implication there? I'm sure that there is, right? When we were at, I'll pick on someone without using the name. When we were at annual conference in September, NASPO's annual conference in Chicago, we had a photo booth. Really neat photo booth. It takes pictures of people or groups, and then it changes the background. It can put you in the Old West. It can put you in famous paintings and different things, right? There were people that did not want to be involved in that because it was AI-generated photos that resulted. And how is my image going to be used, and what does this mean? All right. So let's talk a little bit about government use. So again, there's some links here, and this is from NCUSL, National Council of State Legislatures. I hope I got that right. They put out a little bit here and kind of giving a report of what's going on in legislative sessions and how governments are using AI for government operation. They point out here, we talked about 200 bills that are facing for private regulation. Here we talk about 150 bills just in 2024 relating to government use of AI. And how do they track use of AI? How do they assess the impact of AI? AI guidelines, and so on. Okay? Executive orders from 10 states. How many of you in here in your offices are using AI in some capacity? Officially using AI. That's a great question, Rebecca. Officially using AI, and how many are unofficially using AI? Someone in your office, right? I mean, that's probably the reality of it. But states are really taking two approaches. It's the, oh no, what am I supposed to be doing approach? Or the, we'll sort of jump in and see how this works and provide as best guidance as we can. And so a lot of this is going to change over time. We have, NCUSL reports we have 10 states that have instructed agencies to inventory and describe AI applications. They want to know what's being used, just as a starting point. I know we have folks here from Vermont, so feel free to yell out on this one. Vermont created legislation, and this goes back already a few years, to create a division of artificial intelligence. I hope that's correct. To review aspects of AI development in state software development, anything created or bought or implemented by the state. So a big part of this now is just understanding what's there. And by the way, part of the difficulty with this, how many of you have been using software in your state for years that you didn't realize was AI, and suddenly it's being marketed back to you as AI? Have you noticed that trend? Right? Because anything that is maybe a little smart in any way is now being labeled as AI, even though it wasn't AI. The same thing without much update wasn't AI 5 or 10 years ago. And so what is actually AI? What is being marketed as AI? What are the different levels when we say AI, right? What does that look like? And so I think there are some challenges there when we talk about inventory and understanding how things are being used, because what are we even talking about? And without really good, clean definitions, how do we even get to that framework of where we are? Washington enacted legislation directing the CIO to prepare and make public available on their website an initial inventory of all of, I don't know what a decision system is, but let's just say all of their systems being used by state agencies. Anyone involved in that that's here? Again, I imagine this being a very difficult process. Okay? Now, they identified 8,379 applications in total. 125 of them were identified as an automated decision system, so some level of AI involvement. And I guess I would go back again and ask the question of when these were sold to the state, were they AI versus are they AI now? And again, what happens when you have a system? Like, let's say, for example, a lot of states in here, and I'm just going to pick on PeopleSoft because I've experienced PeopleSoft and I feel like I have the right to pick on them. You go through an implementation, right? You get certain rights. What happens when PeopleSoft does their next update, and maybe they've done this already, and there are all sorts of AI tools in there? Do states always have the ability to decide whether they get the update or not? Sometimes in order to keep current on your license, you need to take the update. Everyone probably has one level of Adobe, right? Adobe Pro, Adobe Reader, whatever it happens to be. There are AI features in there. Did they notify you before they put the AI features in there? Or did one day you turned it on and there's AI in there? If you're a Microsoft shop, your folks had to decide at your IT agency whether or not to leave Copilot on or to turn it off. And maybe what elements to leave on or to turn off. And so this idea of having to inventory AI in order to understand it And from a legal perspective, to understand the risk involved in AI, where we don't necessarily know what AI is, how it's defined, and what technology it's really in and not in, how are we supposed to do that? I know I'm painting a really wonderful picture, right? The intention is for you all to leave more stressed than when you came in, and then enjoy the happy hour afterwards, and you can relax again before you go home. All right. 2024, Delaware and Idaho commissioned and created councils to provide recommendations on guidelines. Again, we see that. Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania established through executive order some standards for AI. We have a recent federal government executive order on AI. We're seeing more and more of this come through. But how many folks in this room have a clear idea of how it impacts you or your agency in the daily work that you do to support the state? And how many of you view that as a problem, right? And so this idea of, okay, everybody, we're going to change, but there's really no transition into that change. There's really no communication and little understanding of how that's going to impact and what's that's going to mean. I think that's the terrifying part about AI. All right, California. Angela, are you still in here? Maybe she left already. I didn't tell her I was going to talk about California, but California's really been leading the way on a lot of the procurement policy and governance and what have you. And I know a number of states have looked at them. That's not to criticize any other state or to say you're further behind. California is just a state that I happen to be familiar with. So they have in their solicitation, and I thought this might be beneficial. There's a link to it so you can get to the language rather than just the summaries. But they have a requirement for Gen AI disclosure in all of their solicitation documents. So if you're responding and you're using Gen AI to create part of your response or using Gen AI in any of your solutions, you need to notify them. And then their technology agency is going to figure out what that level of risk is that is associated with the AI use in the response and in the solution. There's also contract language in here that requires contractually contractors to report the use of AI. Here's an interesting one. Do you think contractors can actually report the use of AI in all situations? So how many, it's interesting times, right? So you're doing a software development project, the contractor says, yep, we agree in the contract, no AI. How many of their developers use AI? And what is using AI, by the way? So going back up to the solicitation language, how many of you are familiar with Grammarly? Grammarly is an AI tool that will look at what you've written, and it will give you recommendations to make your language more clear. It'll correct grammar errors, spelling errors, dangling participles, or whatever those are called. All of that good stuff that we all tried to learn in English but didn't really make sense. It doesn't like legal writing that much, by the way. We kind of write it, we kind of have our own language, right? We like things a little bit different. But if you use Grammarly to help check your proposal before you submit it to make sure it's clear and well written, is that using AI and does that need to be disclosed? I don't know the answer to that question. At what point is Microsoft spell check AI? So it's all of these types of things, right, that make some of this language a little bit challenging. And of course, as attorneys, what do we want as a response? Do we want over-reporting by suppliers or under-reporting? Well, we think we want over-reporting until it all comes to our desk and then we have to solve the problem, right? And then sometimes we're like, oh, just don't tell us, and we would prefer under-reporting. But the contract language is there, and again, the assessment is there based on the type of acquisition and the dollar value as to what the risk is of the use of that AI. Here's another one for us. 25% of states require vendors to disclose when AI is embedded in their solution. So only a quarter of the states, right? So that's, we'll round up a little bit, we'll say 13 states. We know 75% of states are using AI and cybersecurity themselves, and we know a lot of that gets outsourced as well. So we know there are higher uses, but only 25% require disclosure. I assume that number is going to go up quite a bit. All right. Before I go on to some case law, let's talk about some just additional resources. Again, the idea in this presentation was to provide you with resources you could go back to. It's such a large topic, there's no way to address it. Folks ask me, are we going to talk about data privacy or data protection, protecting state data when it comes to AI? We don't have that kind of time. That's a whole separate law institute on AI, and Megan may be working on that down the road. But I want you to have some tools to leave with. And so here is one that I came across, which is the NIST framework. I don't know if everyone's familiar with NIST. Don't make me remember what that stands for, right? But that is a technology standard. And one of the frameworks that they have for success here has to do with implementation of governance for AI. What are the rules around AI? How do we govern AI, map, measure, and manage? And so there are some tools here, some tips here. Right, we can talk about mapping, identifying, and categorizing AI systems. We saw those the prior executive orders that I talked about that really speak to some of that. How do we manage this from a risk perspective? And there's a lot more if you go through this actual framework as to how you can proceed. So if your state is really in a very sort of early phase, nascent phase of addressing AI, this might provide a little bit of guidance as to what needs to be considered. Also of interest, and again, I wanted to put a little bit more up here, but this is a legislative tracker that, as far as I can tell, didn't have any sort of a paywall. I don't know how often it's updated, but it talks specifically about private sector AI governance bills, those things that impact private sector. And it allows you to sort of track along with what is the thought process of the legislators and what is the thought process of the industry for government use and regulation as it goes forward. The other thing is NASPO going into 2026 will be implementing more legislative tracking and trying to really keep an eye on some of the AI initiatives that are going on in the states, amongst a number of other changes to procurement law, code, and policy. All right. So kind of feel if we're going to do a CLE here, we've got to talk a little bit about AI. But AI cases, rather, things that impact AI and case law. How much case law do you think is out there on AI? I would have thought there was a ton that was out there. But it's relatively new, and a lot of what's out there has to do with fighting between technology companies over who owns what. So I was trying to go through here and identify some cases. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a confession here, and that is that I did review and I did do my checking, but I did use AI to help summarize these cases. Again, AI is a tool. It doesn't replace the work, right? But you have an ability to help with drafting. So here's one. And again, I put this up here from a standpoint of a fair use and implications for AI-generated images. All of your states do presentations, right? One way or another. Procurement does presentations. You do training. Have you started seeing AI-generated images? Have you ever seen generated AI images in anything that was brought to you by a supplier? We're going to see more and more of this as we go on. So this is an interesting one, right? There was a photo taken of Ted Nugent. And it was posted on a website that allows you to go in and sort of buy or fair use or whatever different images. And so this was on a website that allowed you to use it for free, but it was what was referred to as a Creative Commons attribution license. So you can use it, but you need to give attribution to the photographer. You need to give credit. And so someone took that photo, the Independent Journal Review, IJR. They cropped the photo, not using the entirety of it, and they put it into one of their articles. and there was a lawsuit around that. And the court found there was no meaningful transformation and the license was violated. And they cite back to another case that, if you have time, is worth looking at if you have any interest in the context of copyright, which is the Warhol case, the Andy Warhol Foundation, and whether or not there's modification or transformation of the works. Here, they looked at it and they said that cropping did not change the character of the work. And so cropping, it was just like as if they had used the original. It wasn't modified, it wasn't transformed, it wasn't changed in any way that would make it something new that might give them any rights to it. It was just cropping the photo. Now, how often do we go online, or does somebody in our office go online, find a photo, make a little bit of a change to it, throw it in a presentation, and move forward? Now, again, probably not a lot of risk there. I don't know about your presentations. Mine don't tend to generate a whole lot of revenue. But there's a risk that's here, and it kind of comes into that fair use piece. And I know when I was in government, we often talked about, okay, can we use that? What's fair use? And so on. There's another case around this one. This was a congressional campaign. It used a successful kid meme. We'll come to that in a moment. But it used a meme from online, hopefully everybody knows what a meme is at this point, to solicit donations. And the jury ultimately awarded some minimal damages for the use of it and held that fair use did not apply. There was no abuse here. But they also noticed the implied license had been waived. And so there's some really interesting things going on in here to say maybe how you use things has some impact. But looking again under Warhol, the further purpose or different character was one of the one of sort of the points out of that case. But the campaign did not add anything to it. They just used it. This was not for any other function. This was not, we know we can use things if we're going to make fun of them, right? I mean, keep that in mind. At least we live in a country where we can copyright and plagiarize as long as we're doing it to make fun of someone. Okay? But again, another fair use case. By the way, I had to look this one up because I didn't know which meme this was. It's a pretty cool meme. Keck versus Mixed Creative. This is another fair use. And again, I don't know that we need to go through all of these, but again, this is another case that talks about the fair use and the Warhol case. And they actually favored fair use here because the educational purpose transformed the original decorative function of the use of the image. And so we often talked about this at the state level as well. We're kind of okay using some things and skirting this a little bit because it's for educational purposes and it's not for commercial purposes. And so again, I think this gives us a little bit of leeway, at least on the government side. Now, recentive analytics is a little bit of a different case with some machine learning applications and, in my mind, some implications for IP protection. Does anybody in here actually work on protecting IP for their states? I know often there's IP discussions, who owns what as it relates with suppliers or with the public universities, but sometimes it may be a little bit more limited. What the case was here is that Recentive had patents that use machine learning to optimize scheduling for live events, right? So we know that there are all sorts of different tools out there that can help us schedule, can help us find tickets for things, can help add things to our calendar, like the virtual assistant pieces and what have you. What happened here, and I probably should have had a little bit more of a summary, but the patent was for the technique. So the patent was for what the machine learning did. Someone else using it in a different way still violates that patent. And so basically what it says here, applying machine learning to a new data environment is not enough. Oh, that was a typo there. See, AI. I'm just going to blame it on AI, right? Is not a technological improvement that you can patent. Just a different use for the same AI tool for the same machine learning. So again, a little bit different. And this comes into play, and the reason I found this interesting is we have, when we implement systems, whether it's at the state level or in the private sector, technology that's coming from other places or being integrated from third-party licenses. What are some of the ownership rights? Is it okay that if you take in a model that was over here and publicly available and included it over here for a different use? Does that violate the patent or not? And this is yes, that violates the patent. It's not the use, it's the initial model that's patentable. Ownership of AI-generated IP. People are probably a little bit more familiar with this case, right? This is the case that requires a human being to create something in order for it to be patentable, or in order to secure it through the patent office, right? And so what it basically said is something created by AI, it can't be patented, it can't be copywritten. It's not created by an owner. And they define that as a human being, an individual. But after that case was settled, the US Patent and Trade Office issued a little bit of additional guidance saying, well, you sort of can patent it, but to do that, you have to name the human inventor who made significant contributions. Now, do they define significant contributions? Is going in and typing in what you want into ChatGPT and having an image created significant contribution? Probably not, if you look at the whole body of the Supreme Court case. But this is something that, again, we don't necessarily know. And so think about that as well when you're generating information, when you're putting together any reports, when you're doing things that might be in some manner something you want to protect down the road. Because the states still do own a certain extent of intellectual property. What does the use of AI do to your ability to maintain that as something that is yours? Kind of scary stuff, right? Anybody else have any other case law or anything else that are questions around AI? I know there are all sorts of questions around data use. I wish I could answer them, but I can't today. But is there anything else that we want to talk about in the context of AI before we wrap up? Understanding that I'm standing between you and a reception and an ability to go out to Savannah. Yes?
How concerned as government dependent on AI and then the costs skyrocketing? Hi. Want me to do? How concerned should we be as government with the cost of AI skyrocketing, and then we're dependent on it?
So I know we're recording this, but I'm going to say this somewhat truthfully, right? I kind of put software sales in the same category often as drug dealers. And I say that, right, because the first one's free. And so it's a legitimate thing, right? There's a lot of AI that out there right now is free trying to get use. Okay, so think about it. I'll use a prime example. Westlaw. How many of you had Westlaw for free in law school? Isn't it nice that, and again, Thomson Reuters Westlaw, it's a great tool, but it's nice that out of the goodness of their hearts, they gave you that for free to help you through your law school experience. But why did they do it? Because how many of you use Westlaw now, right? Because it's what you're familiar with. And so I think it's a bit of the same thing, Rachel. I think that's what I expect to see down the road, is there's a lot of things that are available and tools that are available for free. But will they remain free? I think when Google first came out and was approaching government, everything was free. Any Google user in here in your state, is it still free? Yeah, I see them shaking their heads, right? So these are prime examples, and I think as AI continues to grow, that is likely what we're going to see. And I don't think there's any way around it. So that's a positive note to end on. Any other questions?
Yes, you asked about other areas of case law, and a big one is legal ethics, and
Yeah.
not just the embarrassing, filing of pleadings and whatnot that have hallucinations in them, but also the duty of competency and needing to understand AI in order to meet your obligations to your clients.
So Aaron, I didn't pay you for that plug, but last year at Law Institute, I did a presentation. Is it the new ABA guidance? Is it 512? I might have the number wrong. But I did that last year, and I don't know if that's going to be available or not on the YouTube channel, Megan. Hint, hint. But we did a presentation on the ABA guidance on AI ethics to talk about those very things, right? And the need for attorneys to actually be aware of what AI is, how it can be used, how it is impacting, and all the ethical responsibilities that go along with that, really presenting more on the AI ethics side. And so there's a whole presentation on that. If that video is not up, we can certainly go ahead and provide the slides for that and a link to the ABA guidance. But absolutely a very important area. Is there another question?
Yeah, you mentioned how when addressing AI, it's basically impossible to get around this invisible AI we see, almost what a lot of people consider ghost AI.
Yeah.
So I guess back to the metaphor of software dealers being narcotic movers, what if they do accidentally or unintentionally flow down third-party AI into our agreements and occasionally committing breach? I guess is it something that we just weigh the functionality of for the needs of the state versus the wrong that's been done to it?
So first of all, I haven't met you yet, so give me your name and state.
Fritz Darnell from Tennessee.
Welcome, Fritz.
Thank you.
All right. So I think this is already a little bit of an issue for state government. And there might be folks in here that have a little bit even more experience with this than I do. But it's to what extent when you implement a large system, right, might AI sort of flow in through the back door of a third-party software system or something like that. I think we already have that issue, whether it comes to use of state data flowing in and out to a third party, or even code that comes in, right? We have a big system, but we're bringing in and putting together sort of a best of breed with a few different softwares, and yep, we do that. They told us we need to license this piece of software right here, but what no one ever discloses to us is this piece of software actually feeds a process back to another piece of software, and they just kind of don't tell you. So we know that exists, and we find it from time to time, and we try to put in place licensing, or turn it off, or address those issues. I think it's going to be the same with AI. And it's going to be one of those things that is going to be really hard to identify. And as much as we talk about AI now, 10 years from now, I don't think we'll be talking about AI. This will just be IT procurement. This will just be an IT issue, right? It won't even be a separate thing anymore. At least I think that's a possibility. So while the contractual obligation is there, we know the contractual obligation actually doesn't force anybody to do anything. And so we're probably going to discover it the same way, because we're going to have somebody on some end on the state government looking into the technology, and they're going to see, wait a minute, there's an input coming from here and output. We don't know what that is, right? Or there's some coding that's doing this, and it's going to be discovered largely by accident. And then the state has to decide, is the value of it worthwhile? Do we turn it off? Do we get another license agreement? What do we do? And I think it's going to be very hard to keep a handle on. So I think that's an excellent point. I wish I had a better solution. Okay? Yeah. All right. Yes, Jennifer, I think I have like 20 seconds, and then I'm going over here. So I'm going to ask you to be brief.
I was just going to comment on that. I don't have a question. I think that we are somewhat already having this argument in our IT negotiations, and it's coming up in the form of third-party enabling software, that they won't necessarily disclose who the third party is, what the enabling software is, but they don't want to warrant it. They don't want it to have any of the same implications that your other data will have. And I have a feeling that that's where you're ending up with it in your contracts right now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jennifer. And again, happy to discuss further, and I encourage you all to discuss more. This is the end of the session. As I said here, AI Overlords, thank you for your attention.